anarcho-capitalism. So he's pushing this idea that it's the republic's fault. The republic is the problem. The borders are the problem, and the Constitution is the problem. Any sort of state is the problem, and this is the root cause of evil, and this leads to all the problems we've seen in the world so far, and we see today. And so his idea is to shatter the federal government, and then shatter the smaller governments, and shatter that, and shatter the next thing. And at some point, this is going to be this voluntarist paradise where everybody in the future can pick his own set of laws he wants to live by. So the Islamists can have their Islamic law in America. The communists can have their communist law. Scientology people can have their Scientology law. And tomorrow it might be totally different. You don't know what this country or what this place is going to be like in 5 years or 10 years. And anarcho-capitalism is a trend. It's a fad. It's nothing new, but it has kind of its heyday right now, or it had its heyday before Trump came, right? So Trump became so popular because he was telling people what they wanted to hear. So even some of the most staunch anti-government people, even cult leaders like Stefan Molyneux, even they started to talk positively about Donald Trump. So suddenly it wasn't cool anymore to be against political involvement. It was not cool anymore to boycott elections and voting. So it's a trend, and it has kind of infiltrated the truth movement. It has contaminated the truth movement. It used to be in America, the American truth movement, it used to be about the basic order, the country, the borders, Constitution, Bill of Rights, basic government, and then of course develop that further. But anarcho-capitalists are saying, tear it all down, no politics whatsoever, everything's going to be private. And more of these truthers are abandoning the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and this is not a good thing. So Adam has been riding this train for a while, and I think he's continuing to ride this train. This is his fan base now. This is his personality. If he still believes in this or not, I don't know, but this is what he's pushing. Because he makes a living, pushing this stuff to his fans. So, and then of course, in the election, which Trump obviously won, in the election, Ron Paul was refusing to endorse Gary Johnson, the candidate for the Libertarian Party. And Ron Paul even said he prefers the foreign policy of Green Party boss Jill Stein. And Jill Stein, she's just this Russian-loving... Jill Stein is just this suspicious Russian-loving creature. She goes to Russia and she meets President Putin, the dictator, and she wants to give the Russians and the Chinese what they want. That's her idea. And Ron Paul is scarily on the side of the Russians. I mean, he does what Murray Rothbard did. He makes excuses for Russia all day long. So most libertarians or most ultra-libertarians today would be hopelessly lost in the real world of diplomacy, war, and covert warfare. Government intervention in another country, military intervention, they're not automatically per se bad, And isolationism or non-interventionism is not automatically good. It's no use to go from one extreme to the other. The one extreme, the American empire being the world, this insane world police, going to the other extreme of doing nothing and letting the rest of the world do whatever they please, gather weapons of mass destruction and biological weapons, radiological and chemical. Let everybody else do what they do. Let every other country in the world become a victim of the Russian Empire and the Chinese Empire. It's just a dumb idea to go from one extreme to the other. And so, in libertarian circles, you have a lot of stupid discussions like, shouldn't we help the Chinese more? Shouldn't we make more deals with the Chinese because that's libertarian and that's going to help them become free at some point? In reality, it's just helping the communist dictatorship in China. And there's stupid libertarian discussions about, should we save people who are subjected to genocide in another country? So they're even asking that question. If it's against the holy ideology, the holy libertarian ideology to save people with your military in another country who are being genocided, who are being killed en masse. So these people, they put their ideological nonsense and their ideological ideas above people. I myself, I run a business. I run two businesses under one roof. I'm married. I have children. I live libertarian values every day and conservative values every day. I live it every day. I'm not just sharing memes, libertarian memes on Facebook. I'm not just copying anarcho-capitalist claptrap on YouTube, right? I live this every day, and I see so many bad, horrible discussions. So, libertarian ideas and principles are just important pieces of a bigger puzzle. Libertarian ideas are not the whole puzzle, are not the whole thing. And many libertarians, especially anarcho-capitalists, anarchists, they think they know it all. They think they have the whole idea, the whole concept, and everything else is below their ideology, right? Everything else is just everything else is inferior to their ideology. But libertarian ideas, they're just pieces to a larger puzzle. And libertarians have to realize that the biggest enemies of liberty, the grandest, most dangerous enemies of liberty, they hide behind liberties. They hide behind liberty. And so, this is what many voluntarist libertarians don't understand. They think that you just have to remove the state and everything is going to be hunky-dory, or at least you have enough private security forces to shoot down all the bad guys, right? So libertarian thinking and anarchist thinking is not the one-size-fits-all universal mega theory. It's not. The modern republic, the modern republic is stuck in the 19th century or 18th century, right? It needs an upgrade. We need to incorporate modern research on human evil, right? The psychology of evil, the neurology, the genetics of evil, and the group dynamics of evil. That's what we have to use. We cannot have narcissists and psychopaths in government. We have to find out ways to keep them out of office. We have to find these ways, and we have to find ways to keep them out of our lives, our private lives, our business lives. That's the only way we can actually save ourselves from evil, right? We have to understand evil. We have to fix it scientifically. So no ideology is going to save you, because these ideologies were cobbled together centuries ago when we had no idea about genetics, we had no idea about psychology, and we had no idea about neurology and what that has to do with evil, right? The ideologies are not going to save you, because these ideologies don't understand evil, and they have these ideologies, they all have a weird understanding of evil, right? The communists think evil comes from the family and private ownership and the ability to trade, right? So they want to destroy these things to fight evil, but of course that creates a nightmare. And racists and neo-Nazis, fascists, they believe all evil comes from the Jews or anybody who doesn't look like the average Middle European. So the fascists argue you have to destroy all these people, and then evil will be defeated for good. Just total lunacy. And anarchists or libertarians, ultra-libertarians, and libertarian anarchists, they believe that the state, the concept of a state, the republic, borders, and constitution, that this is the root cause of all evil. So you have to destroy that to fight evil and combat evil. This is a completely lunatic, outdated idea of evil. So people are being taught to boycott politics, to not get involved, to not really show their strength in politics. And it's terrible. It's terrible to boycott politics. It's terrible to boycott politics, and people's power, the people's power is being diminished by this boycotting, and our forces are neutralized. So people think anything voluntary is automatically good, and every time somebody forces someone, that's automatically bad. But that's not how reality is, right? Voluntary is not automatically good, and being forced is not automatically bad. You know, with government force, you can protect the national borders, you can enforce the rule of law, the basic rule of law. And there are many people, there are many things that people do, things that are bad for them, but they do it anyway. So, so people are still arguing they would not go to an election even if their one single vote could prevent a dictator. So that's kind of this ideological cult thinking that you see, and that's very, very dangerous. That is very, very dangerous. And so, anarchists like Adam Kokesh, they present to you three different categories of things, three different categories of ideas. Their basic ideological principles, and then they present to you their fantasy, their perfect fantasy of a free, voluntary society, the fantasy, and then they give you, and then they also give you their ideas of what they want to do right now or next week. You know, just concrete ideas for action to get towards that fantasy ideal, right? So these are the categories of ideas the anarchists give you, anarchists like Adam. The basic ideological principles, the fantasy, perfect society, and then they give you ideas of what they actually want to do to go towards and move towards that fantasy society. And in these discussions, during discussions, or when an anarchist like Adam explains something, these anarchists, they tend to jump back and forth between these things, between these categories, right? And you need to separate these categories, and you need to look at them individually and see, okay, does this hold water? Does this make sense, or does that make sense, or does it not make sense? For example, anarchists argue with their fantasy, but that's not a legitimate argument, right? Whenever you discuss something with an anarchist and you say, well, I don't think this is going to work, or I don't think that's a good idea, or this is going to turn out bad, usually you get a reply from the anarchist saying, well, in the voluntarist society, in the finished, complete voluntarist society, this wouldn't be a problem because this would be fixed by this and that and this and that. But that's not a counter-argument. That's not an argument at all. This is just a fantasy. It's like the fantasy of Islamists who say, in the perfect Islamic society where Sharia is implemented 100%, everything would be fine and hunky-dory, every problem would be solved. Or Scientology people will say, well, in the perfect Scientology society where everybody is Scientology, every problem would be solved, everything would be great. It's not a real argument because there has never been this perfect voluntary society that can defend itself, right, against foreign and domestic enemies. There's never been this dream society that lasted and had power, right? So it's a fantasy construct, and you shouldn't allow people in a discussion to use that fantasy as an argument, because it's not an argument. It's just a fantasy. So in a discussion, anarchists, they tend to use that trick. They jump back and forth between other arguments and using the fantasy, right? So they think they are right. They continue that idea that they know everything and they can answer every question. And then of course you have the basic ideological principles, and if you look at them, they're too basic, they're too broad. Everything should be voluntary. Voluntary is good. Involuntary things are bad, and involuntary things lead to more bad things, and only voluntary things lead to good things, right? It's overly simplistic. It doesn't really do justice. It doesn't really do the world justice. The world is way more complex. People like to hear easy answers and absolute principles, but mostly these ideological principles that the anarchists like Adam present to you, most of the time, these principles are just wishes. It's just a hope. Oh, everything should be voluntary. Nobody should be forced to do anything. That's a nice goal. That's a nice fantasy, but it's not a realistic principle, right? And this leads us to the next category of stuff anarchists like Adam Kokesh present to you, the category of what they actually want to do in the real world right now and next week and next year, things they actually recommend you to do to move towards this free voluntary society. And this is actually their weakest category, right? Because everything they suggest is weak, and they want to stay away from politics. They don't want to take political power, and all these ideas they propose, they're garbage, right? And they even say, well, it might take 1,000 years, but they do not want to contaminate their perfect ways and their sacred ideology. They don't want to contaminate it by making compromises and being politically active. So they don't want to compromise it. So they don't want to get politically active. They just want to spread more podcasts from Molyneux or Kokesh and the same stuff in books, and that's what they want to do. And then they dream about a community like with their own rules. And they try that, and it usually fails because these anarchists, they start fighting with each other. We've seen a lot of projects like this, like the Gulch Chili community, where people just started fighting each other and suing each other. So that's what they suggest, but it never works. And then they have some other ideas that don't really work. They try to find ways to dodge taxes and stuff, and this is the weakest thing. They have no believable way, no believable tools of actually getting any closer to their fantasy goal of the perfect society. They got nothing. And what they suggest, weakening the borders, letting everybody in who wants in, just weakening the state so that big corporations can get more power. All of these ideas are just very, very dangerous, and especially if they're done wrong, if they're done like they're usually done. So if you allow, that's something anarchists suggest, if you allow Islamists to practice Islamic law in America or in Europe, that's a horrible idea. It's not going to increase liberty. So anarchists claim that people generally choose freedom. Usually they don't. Anarchists claim people make rational decisions as, consumers or whatever, customers. People don't make rational choices. Then anarchists claim people learn from their mistakes either, or they from their bad purchasing choices, or they just go into a corner and sulk. They're not going to rise up and fight you. But that's also wrong. Unfortunately, people are drawn to irrational cult movements, and these cult movements get really big and really dangerous, and they're going to steal your freedom. So, then anarchists want to privatize police and the justice system and Of course, huge investors would then get the whole market, and this is actually what the globalists want: no more borders, nothing that stands in their way. Then you have stupid projects like Liberland, like this phony guy who lays claim to a small stretch of swamp in Eastern Europe, saying this is my country now, and of course he's not allowed to go there, he's not allowed to do anything there, and he's just stringing people along, so they give him money and donations, telling people this is going to be so great. Pure joke. And then of course the question, would you allow Chinese government or Chinese front organizations, Chinese investors, would you allow them to buy land, huge amounts of land in America, so they can build military camps there and store weapons there? I mean, anarchists say, if you buy a stretch of land, this is your property, you can do whatever you want with it. But what if China brings in 50 million Chinese to America, right? And start building military facilities and military installations? What then? Would you feel comfortable, right? If the Chinese use their bought property for whatever the purpose they want, would you enjoy that? Or would you think, well, they're probably going to attack us once it becomes obvious to them that they're going to win, right? And of course, anarchists, they usually understand nothing about war, nothing about military matters, but anarchists believe their anarchist ideology answers every question for them. It answers every question. It's the perfect ideology. So they try to apply their ideology to military and war, and they think, well, people are going to voluntarily come together, buy themselves a tank, learn how to use that tank, and then they're going to look on the free market for a military goal they can achieve with their tank, and then they're gonna achieve it and get money. It's so stupid. I don't even know where to begin. And then some anarchists, they want these big private security corporations, private corporations with more weapons than any military on Earth and any other military on Earth. And this is, of course, really stupid and dangerous idea. So